Welcome to another episode of the Alignment Podcast. Really excited to have Tara Egan with us here today. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Jacob. I'm very excited to be on. I think this is my second podcast, so I'm very excited.
So I know we were talking a little bit before about what you do. Give us the elevator pitch of what you've done and what you're doing right now and what you're most excited about.
Yeah, happy to. So I was a corporate HR person for 20 plus years, which is crazy to say that. And over those 20 years, what I started to see, I worked with some large companies, but a lot of smaller companies. And what I started to see was, they really put a lot of time into their financial plans, into their business plans, but the people plan is always kind of late to the party. And so that's after those 20 years in corporate HR, I spun out, started my own company called Serve HR or SRV HR, and I do fractional HR work for small to mid-sized companies.
That's awesome. How has it been different from being full-time in-house to outside? What do you like better? What do you like less?
Yeah, so variety, it certainly being in-house that has its advantages, and you feel definitely more part of the family, so to speak. But I think one thing I've really surprisingly, I was kind of surprised by this is as I've started to build my business, it's variety. I have clients with, from different industries. And while people are people and HR is HR in a lot of ways, it is new and exciting and challenging to kind of have my day mixed up, a mix of things from pharmaceuticals to landscaping to financial services and what they have going on as businesses.
Are there any common threads between them of like the problems that they have?
Well, as I mentioned, I think my kind of target client are these not super small, but smaller firms. And I think the common thread is, entrepreneurial firms like to move fast. And sometimes when you're moving fast, it's kind of like we'll figure out the structure and stuff later. And so I think that's been something that I've been able to come in and go like, wow, you guys have had an incredible start, an incredible start to the way you've built your business. But now let's look at what you're already doing for the people and how we can be more intentional around that. And so that has definitely been a theme of like, we're running, we're going, that kind of stuff, we'll figure that out, and now it's like, okay, now it's time to figure it out.
Does anybody ever push back and say, no, the chaos is intentional?
I don't know that anyone ever says that chaos is intentional. I think you certainly see people that thrive in chaos. And so even when you're trying to remove some of that, they find ways of bringing it back in, and so I can appreciate like you want to honor. I mean, maybe chaos, I wouldn't, but you want to honor that
Sure.
quick moving. I get what you're saying, but that quick moving entrepreneurial spirit. So you want to honor that, right? You don't want to lose that and slow things down. And so I try to ease people into that. And my motto is kind of like come from a place of yes. So if instead of coming in and go, no, you guys are doing this all wrong and you can't do that. Typically we start with like, where are you trying to get to? And let's talk about a way that we can do that in a compliant way, in a way that will be good for the people.
Yeah. It I've definitely there was one place I worked where the CEO was like anytime somebody new hired would come in and their first move was like, oh, let's get structure. He was like, you're not a fit. Get out.
Yeah, it is uncomfortable,
He
right?
did live in the chaos though. I think it was more just, he thrived in that and he didn't want anybody to ruin the way he worked.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So as you start working with somebody, how do you, right? And you talked about like how understanding where they want to get and how do you do it in a way that's compliant. How do you get accurate with the team? Right. Oftentimes executives, especially in small businesses, well, all businesses are a little delusional about the current state of, especially as it comes to people things. How do you get accurate in a way that engages the existing executive team in wanting to make things better?
I think a lot of that comes from feedback. So it could be informal, really getting engaged with the workforce. So yes, there's kind of the C-suite or the COO, CEO, the person that hired me to come in. But then it's like time to go a next layer because I engage with that group, but really as I've built out this business, a lot of my day-to-day interactions are with the COOs of the world and the operations team and chiefs of staff. And so as you start to engage with kind of the next layer and then the next layer, you get that informal feedback. Separately in my corporate life, even in some of the smaller organizations I worked with, we liked surveys and kind of that voice of the employee. How are we not only getting that feedback, but I always said, I don't want the feedback if we're not committed to doing something about it. And
Yeah.
I think that's always been a way to kind of open up the eyes of the leadership because it's a direct, like this is a direct feedback and you take the comments out. I know those can be hard to read, but numbers are numbers. And that typically speaks to that group a little bit better than some of the subjective comments and feedback that we get.
Did you find that that was kind of the key to get executive action was to focus on the numbers instead of the anecdotal comments?
I think it depends on the person. Some CEOs and leaders, they hear one comment from an employee and they think we have a big problem. Like, I think you get both ends of the spectrum, or you hear a couple comments and you're like, oh, they're just one of those people. And so there's a happy medium there. And so I think it's learning how they respond. Some of them do respond well to numbers, and then some of them just respond well to some good, healthy, direct conversations.
So that's cool. It takes effort to have a culture where employee engagement is measured and acted upon. We kind of right there was kind of from the executive side. How have you run into this? And if so, how have you resolved this where people are like not willing to share things because they're like, it's never been acted upon before? There's a lot of organizations that I talk to that they're like, yeah, we send out our quarterly engagement. We get like 20 to 30% of employees to fill it out. Cool, our ENPS score. And then they're like, it's wonderful. And they've calculated it wrong.
Yeah.
And then they like brag about some number that I'm like, wait, well, what are you doing about this? They're like, well, nothing. It's great. I'm like, it's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you bring up a really good point. The participation is huge, right? Like if you can't get, I mean, 70 is kind of my min. Like if I can't get 70% out of a survey, then that the exercise starts to become less valuable in my eyes. But we really aim to get between, I mean, 100% is probably lofty, but we really aim to get between 70 and 90% participation. So I think that's a good point is like, how do you drive that participation? Some of it is I have to use the like, hey, I'm here now. You have my commitment that if you will open up and do these, like, this is the plan, and let them see what the plan is ahead of time. You filling out this survey is only the first step in this process. And then from here, within this time frame, we're going to send you out the results so you can see how we did. And then from there, we're going to have meetings with leadership by this date to create one item, just one, like we can't solve the world that we want to focus on. And then we're going to tell you that this is the item that we're focusing on. So I think it's a lot of really intentional communication, giving them the timeline and then executing on the timeline.
And that seems to work pretty well. Can you
I think
usually get
so. I
to
mean,
70%?
yeah, the one of my previous organizations, we were hitting consistently high 70s, mid 80s, and we
Wow.
surveyed twice a year, so that was good. But surveys were new there. So I do think that it could be a little bit more challenging in an organization where they had done surveys and maybe mishandled it. And, I certainly have worked with that, but a little bit less common because a lot of times when I come in, that's kind of one of the first things I want to do is what are our feedback tools to get information back from the employees?
Do you, in an instance like that, do you think that the engagement surveys should be anonymous or not?
My famous saying is this survey is as anonymous as you want it to be. And what I mean by that
Okay,
is
yeah.
if, like if you give me this very detailed comment that says Tommy did this to Sally and said, I'm like, okay, well, I know who that is. And it's much easier to figure out. Not that I'm like trying to figure it out, but I do think they should be anonymous. That said, I want there to be other avenues because in a good culture, really, people shouldn't feel like they need to be anonymous, right? Like they should feel like they can just come in and share feedback, not even in a survey. And so I think you get there, but I do think surveys is a good tool to keep anonymous. That said, I think we should be aiming to like have very open, candid conversations. I'm a big believer in candor and being able to share direct feedback in a way that's not like beating someone over the head with it, good and bad stuff.
Yeah. How do you, when you start working with somebody, how do you help them to intentionally develop that type of a culture where they can share, you know, feedback? like that?
So if I'm the one receiving the feedback, the first thing I do is thank people for it. I think, acknowledging and telling them, like, "Thank you so much for sharing that with me. Thanks for coming in and telling me that. I know that it wasn't easy." And I think just calling it out, like, you're gracious that they were willing to do that. So I always start with that. And when I get managers that are seeking counsel, leaders, and they say, like, "Oh, like," my first thing to them is, "Stop. Like, let's try to, like, accept the feedback, kinda check the current emotions that's bringing up for you, like, we
Yeah.
can deal with that, but, like, we should be thankful that they're bringing this to you and not somebody else."
Yeah. What impact do you think that has on a team and a business, right? Those kind of being two different sides when you have an intentional culture like that, where you're able to share feedback.
From a team perspective, I think it builds trust. And I mean, I think that is a foundational element of strong teams is that they trust one another. They trust one another that they can fail. They trust one another that if they do fail, that the team will pick them up. So I think that's huge. And it's not that we want people out there, messing everything up, but good things come when there's a little bit of tolerance for failure. And I think that's huge for a call it an isolated team within an organization. At the organizational level, I think it's similar in, that if an organization, an executive team, and all of those groups start to trust each other as well, it really becomes a collaborative machine. And again, I think that's where really special things start to get unlocked.
Do you have any insight around like dollar wise or percentage wise the impact that that has?
I probably wouldn't have that today. No, but that's actually a really good question. That's definitely worth thinking through.
Yeah, there's a lot of research out there that shows, when people feel like they're aligned with the culture, increases the likelihood they're going to share feedback and all these different things. Teams, I think the last number I saw was teams are 22% more profitable,
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible.
which is nuts, right? I mean, if you're in a small business, 20% is big, but I mean, you're in a bigger business, that's massive.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I believe
Yeah,
that. I think that statistic is probably very true.
yeah. No, that's cool. So um, when teams have that and they're intentional about that culture, something special happens, right? It's magic.
Mhm.
How that's um I like to think of like ways to tell if something's working well on a team that I'm at. And so I'm wondering if you were a leader on a team and nobody had come to you with feedback for X number of weeks, eventually you'd get concerned that like maybe there isn't a culture of being able to give feedback. How frequently do you think people should be sharing feedback and having conversations like this?
I typically, depending on the teams, I typically had probably weekly one-on-ones with directs. With peers, probably twice a month. I was, and kind of my approach has been weekly with your direct team, twice a month with your peers. And I feel like each one of those one-on-one touch points is there should be an invitation, whether it ends with like, "Hey, how do you think things are going? Is there anything I can be doing, differently, support you better?" And hopefully, if that culture is starting to build, they're asking you the same thing in return, because I do think there's something about an invitation, right? If especially a direct report, if they feel like they've opened the door for me to share this, I think it takes some of the intimidation out of it. And so I think that's a good cadence is just in your regular one-on-ones, you're exercising that muscle. And maybe sometimes it's like, no, this is great. Thank you for asking. But sometimes it may be like, yeah, actually, I did kind of want to talk about this. So thank you for asking. So it does kind of open that door up.
Yeah, and I think that what you mentioned earlier around like, you know, being very aware of how you're feeling when people share feedback is super important because, all it takes is, if you're my manager and you ask me that at the end of a one-on-one and I'm like, yeah, I really feel like you need to, trust me a little bit more on this thing. And you're like, slam the table and are like, I like, you've been messing up, whatever, and you like react. That is the last time I'm ever sharing feedback, right? That's the last time I'm ever going to share it. And so, or even if they've seen somebody or they've seen a leader react in a certain way, it's like, cool, well, they're asking for feedback, but it's not, they're just going through the motions, it's not genuine.
I think another kind of critical mistake you can make when you're receiving that is defensiveness. Like, yes, I'm sure there was a very good reason that you did what you did, whatever they're bringing to your attention. You probably have a very good reason. That's not the time to share it. If you opened the door, offered that invitation, and they were brave enough to share it, again, it's, wow, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I'd love to talk more about how we can, make this better. If it's something about you personally, like I'm going to give that some thought. Let me sit with that for a few days and I'd love to revisit this conversation. And maybe there is a part of you that you feel like you need to defend is probably not the right word, but you need to explain. I
Yeah,
think there's a
justify.
way to do
Yeah.
it. Yeah, yeah, justify. Thank you. But you just have to be careful with that, right? Like, I think you really just have to listen, be thankful that they shared it, and then let that moment pass. And then if you need to pick that back up later, don't pick it up in the way of like, when you said this, I really thought about it. And the reason I did that is because, you never show up on time and you never
Yeah.
turn anything in on time, Jacob. So that's why I don't try. Like, there's a different way to coach to that, right? So, yeah, good point.
Yeah, I think one thing I've realized in, like, every aspect of my life is, you don't have to try to fix things right
Mm,
now.
yeah.
Often it's better to, when a friend says something or one of my kids does something and it's like, oh, I'm recognizing that I'm feeling a certain way, or like I'm feeling defensive or like frustrated. It's like, you know, I don't have to, like, there's no point in lecturing right in the moment or attacking it. You can wait and approach it again, and likely, you'll have more clarity, and things will go better. Uh people to do a great job, and they
Mhm.
want to have awesome relationships. And so when we approach it assuming the best and helping people and just like having genuine care for them, it turns out
Yeah.
almost always better than we think it will.
Yeah. That you may the assume positive intent is a big one, right? Like, if someone I think we have a tendency, I think there can sometimes be these negative cultures where it feels like people like, "Oh, I think they're out to get me," or "I feel like I'm competing against this person constantly." And so I think assuming positive intent, maybe they aren't. But boy, does it help your own personal mental state if you just assume that they meant well by that.
Percent, right? Then
Yeah.
it's, yeah, everybody's on your team,
Mhm. That's
right?
right.
And it is very rare that somebody's actually not and somebody is malicious, and those things work themselves out.
That's right.
But, well, awesome. This has been really fun, Tara. I'm
Good.
curious
Thank you.
for any listeners who want to follow along and see anything else that you share in the future, and learn more about what you do. What's the best place to find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is definitely the best. So Tara Egan, Serve HR, and would love to connect with you all. I do some videos. You can cringe along with me. So feel free to follow me there. And then I can also be found on the srvhr.com website. If you go to find an advisor, you'll find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks,
This
Jacob.
has been great, and
Yeah,
excited
I
for all
appreciate
the
it.
people that you're working with too.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.